there's been a lot of talk today about changing practices, about shifting from projects to product teams, more continuous delivery, more of that kind of agile before agile became a dirty word almost. And so what I want to talk about today is the big efforts that companies are going through where they're talking about their digital transformations. But what I want to do differently to what a lot of companies will do, they'll say, let's do digital transformation because we want to be agile and we want to be like Spotify and Google and those kind of things. But my opinion is you should never start from the technology. So my first question to our group is, why do we need to do a digital transformation? What's the business value in doing a digital transformation? And I'll start with Courtney.
All right. Thanks, Rory. I'm super excited to be here. So I think that most organizations are trying to stay relevant. And the industry that I'm in, I think, is one of the ones that, is always being disrupted. It's retail. It's like, how do you maintain enough of your agility and ability to respond and react to what your customers are needing and wanting? And so having that ability to operate with the right speed and really set up your culture. So that's the other thing. It's like, it is not about technology. It is about the culture and the ways of working and how you're thinking about delivering against what you need to remain competitive in this market. Because customers have a lot of choices. And if you can't get that right, I think the rest of it kind of falls apart.
Great. So it's about kind of the adaptability and reactivity. Pete, do you have anything to add on that? What's the business value of doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can echo some of Courtney's comments from the retail side. During my time at Target, that was definitely the story that was that we were telling. And since then, I've had experience in banking, in a fitness organization, and a government organization, actually. And a lot of them are pretty similar in that they're responding to shifts in market needs. And so they need to be able to get to speed, I should say, get to market more quickly. They need to be able to pivot more quickly to respond to future needs. There is a tech component to this. If you've got kind of antiquated tech that is filled with debt, that ultimately you've got to be able to help modernize the stack in order to enable some of those things that we're pursuing. And then to Courtney's point, just avoiding kind of further disruption, right? I think everybody that's established that was comfortable, hopefully is uncomfortable by now and expecting to be disrupted. And so how do you kind of disrupt yourself before somebody else can do it to you? And then ultimately, one big thing that stood out to me while we were at Target was just the fact that if we're trying to create a differentiated experience, we want to own it ourselves. And so product and kind of the digital transformation that goes under product or with product is getting yourself to a spot where if it's a commodity, great, we can partner with somebody to do it. But if it's something that's differentiated in the marketplace, we want to have our own code, we want to have our own experience, we want to own that and be able to push it forward so that nobody else can do it. I always joke around with folks that are quote unquote product owners for vendor applications and say you're helping them develop their roadmap for your competitors too. If you don't own it yourself, you're kind of not so much a product owner. But those are the things that stood out to me.
Great. No, it's a good example of looking at kind of that survivability and the kind of uniqueness of what you're bringing. I guess, Adam, what I kind of looking at it from the US Air Force point of view, do you have that same kind of need to prove the value, or how did you sell, like when you were trying to do your transformation, how did you sell that internally?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think from an Air Force or Department of Defense perspective, we're not, building a product to sell necessarily, but the concepts are the same. I like to think of it as I want to make sure my organization is prepared as possible for our inevitable wrongness, right? So if you think about digital transformation from an Air Force perspective, is that we want to make sure we're prepared to win a war with Russia or China, right? Which is like, sounds kind of weighty to talk about. And if we put the weight of that aside for a second and think of it as like strictly a product problem, we're preparing for a scenario that's never happened before. We don't know what will look like. We can't really predict it. We have no experience with. So we know we're going to be wrong with whatever we build here in order to solve this problem. So how do we ensure that our organization is prepared for that inevitability and has the ability to sense and respond to whatever change happens on the battlefield in our case, right? So it's all about now continuous delivery. And do we have product and design professionals that can identify where things go wrong and how to respond to that in the right way to get closer and closer to right, which is, you know, a normal problem everywhere for all of our product organizations, just a slightly different lens within the DoD. And as far as selling that, that's what we sell, right? It's like, if we can't afford to not work in this way, because like everybody agrees on the problem now, right? We're at a place in the DoD and the government where everybody understands that the government's in a tough spot. It's actually pretty interesting when you think about the term good enough for government work, right? We've always thought about that in a sarcastic way, but really it came from like World War II when we were building, our factories were churning out things for World War II. And it was like, you know, we had exactness and preciseness in building those things. And over time, that just got like cynical, right? Because the government just became more and more bureaucratic and hard to maneuver. So I think everybody aligns and understands the problem that we're in. Now, when we sell digital transformation, it's about how do we change systems of work to be able to maneuver with the inevitable pace of change that's coming, so we can be prepared for that day we hope never comes in reality.
Great example. But just as you were talking there, point from Teresa's talk earlier in the day, she was like, don't be that advocate. Don't be that like religious zealot who's like, we have to do this and we have to, it's going to improve everything. And there's the one true path. So how did you avoid being like a zealot, but actually convincing your management that let's start this path and let's do something here?
This is why you're a great moderator. I screwed this one up. We talked about this before. Like when that happened, I did become that kind of evangelist to a degree, and like it became a problem over time when I would go talk to stakeholders about our need to move to a more agile mindset and all of these kind of product things that we're all talking about here. And it became like a point where I became like Charlie Brown teacher, where I'd kind of walk into a room and these stakeholders are just like, okay, here comes Adam's 10 minutes of agile talk. We'll just, you know, space out for a bit and get back to business afterwards. So I struggled with connecting and meeting stakeholders where they are. And I learned that over time with being not as effective as I would like to be. But one of the ways that I went to or tried to solve that is by finding user champions to kind of do that work for me. So how can I get somebody who's actually understanding and receiving the value that we're creating, let them go tell our story about why this is a better way of working. That way our stakeholders are getting it from them. Rather than me selling my own work with my own inherent biases and incentives and things like that. So I got somebody else to do my dirty work, I guess, is the answer to that one.
Lovely. And Courtney, similar question to you. So you were mentioning about the adaptability, reactivity. They can seem kind of a bit hand wavy in a way, like, and I don't mean that dismissive, but it's how do you get past that kind of just, this is a kind of a super important thing to the nitty gritty of getting buy-in to start making change?
Yeah, so I think it starts with starting small. So finding someone that you can connect with that will get in it with you. So I had a business partner at one point during the transformation I was going through at Nordstrom, who was willing to kind of roll up her sleeves and get in it with me and really try to figure out what is it going to look like for us to operate differently and achieve better outcomes. Because a lot of us who have been in kind of this mindset for a while, we know that it's better, either because we've been through it personally or we've seen others go through it. Like, we know it's a better way of working. But getting others to see it is hard. And so finding someone, I love Adam's example. It's like, you got to find someone who can then also be a voice. So it's not just you. I've also connected others in the industry with peers that have gone through it. So for example, funding models are hard. in our world. Find a CFO at a company who's already made the mindset shift. Connect your CFO with that CFO. That way, it's not me saying our funding model's flawed and it needs to be different. It's someone else saying, oh, I've seen what it looks like to change our funding model and it's better. And so trying to figure out how to influence in a different way. And then once you start to get results, amplify those. But I love, again, go back to what Adam said, but allow the amplification of that come from a different source so that people see that it's not just us as the change agents or the passionate ones being the only voice saying that this is a better way to get better outcomes.
I love that example, even the external outside the company. So get that experience in. That's a great example. Thanks. And Pete, do you have any insights on selling it and trying to just get off the ground?
Yeah, it's funny that Courtney talks about bringing people from the outside world, because at Target, that was one of the things that we did. We had an annual conference that we stood up, that the only rule that I had for speakers to show up at Product DNA for Target was that they didn't work at Target. And so we wanted everybody's voice to be kind of an external voice coming in. So it's a great tactic. I love it. And it increased engagement for us every single time we did it. You could see that it would literally increase the energy of the product organization for at least a quarter before it started to fade again, or at least go back to, good God, I'm busy. But so I'd reinforce that one. The other thing that I'm trying to do from company to company is really looking at kind of the unique North Star for each organization. And so for the Department of Human Services, it's all about, how do we become better stewards of taxpayer dollars and get kind of more services to the human beings and the citizens of Minnesota in order to support their actual needs. And that's an exciting thing to go after. It doesn't say anything about agility or product. It's like, this is what we're trying to accomplish. And then we're going to use some different ways of experimentation to get there. Same thing with the fitness org. They had to go through all kinds of hoops during COVID to get incredibly innovative in a heartbeat. And it blew up the way that they were working before. So for that particular situation, we're saying, how do we harness the innovation that we just came up with without having to kind of inflict a bunch of tech debt on ourselves and so on. So how do we operationalize the mindset, but make the operating patterns a little bit safer as we go forward? And then same thing with the bank. It's basically the bank's big vision from a digital perspective was saying, hey, like the folks that are going to disrupt us enable our customers to do whatever they need to on our platforms. And so our North Star is basically saying, how do we get a DIY platform that says our customers can do anything they can do in a branch electronically and easier than they could do it in a branch, and drive toward that. And then ideally, if you're getting them aligned around those types of visions, that you're not emphasizing the tactics all the time. You're trying to emphasize the destination that you're going after. And then the only last thing I would say would be that I'd reinforce what Adam said earlier about humility. Basically, is kind of what I interpreted, is that let's assume that we're wrong and that it's inevitable that we're going to be wrong. And so we've used a series of product values, about 7 values with trust underneath them all. But basically, it's passion, curiosity, and empathy are kind of the head and the heart values. And then bias toward action, kinship, and focus are kind of the delivery-centric values. And then humility is dead center, and it's the core of all of it, to say, let's assume we're wrong, and then see how all of our processes would change if that was our underlying assumption. Would I fund things the same way? Would I interact with my partners the same way? Would I interact with my customers the same way, or maybe start interacting with them to see if I'm right? And then from underneath all of that is the trust layer, that we can't do all those things above it if we're not willing to trust each other to do each other's jobs, or do our own jobs, basically. So that's the end of my preach. I get going on the values and I can't stop.
So no, it's a great point though, and it actually touches on my next question. Is like, so you've got the values and you've got your kind of your North Star for your company. You've got your buy-in because you brought in a CFO from somewhere. But organizations are huge. So do you do everything at once? Are you going to be overwhelmed? And Courtney, I'd love, actually, just because you mentioned at the start small. So can you elaborate on that? Like, you've got the buy-in. How do you get the ball rolling?
Yeah. So in my experience, definitely like that start small matters. Like the boil the ocean or a big bang approach, I haven't seen be as successful. So what I've tried is, take a couple teams. And one thing that I think is important when you're going through the transformation is a lot of organizations assume that not every team needs it or can go through it. And I'll give an example. So when I picked 2 teams at Nordstrom, we picked our customer mobile team because it was visible and important, and we weren't delivering as fast as we wished that we were. We also picked a mainframe team because there were all these assumptions that our mainframe team would just forever be antiquated and legacy, which is not true. And so we took and applied the techniques around value stream mapping and product ownership and all those techniques to both of them so that we could show that it was relevant regardless of what technology you were working in. And then leadership matters. So I think we all know that's true, but there was a readiness component. Like you needed the leaders who were in the kind of hierarchy of the team to all be bought in through actions and not just words. So how were leaders engaging? Were they engaging in a way where they were really helping the teams, or were they making the decisions on the team's behalf? And so making sure that we had the leadership engagement, but also had the right structure in place so that teams felt supported and not micromanaged. So I tell this story about Gemba. I believe in Gemba. Go and see, be close to the work. And I had some of my peers say, well, that's micromanagement. And I said, no, it's go and see, not go and tell. You're not there to tell the team what to do. You're there to problem solve, and you're there to show up and be a supporting, someone that they can use to unblock things. So I think that starting small, having leaders be ready, having leaders engaged in the right way, and really showing that you're there to be supportive is what I've seen work.
And I'm going to go for a bit of controversy here because I actually know, Pete, that you have a differing view. So do you want to share your view on this?
And it's one of those things that I don't even know if it's a differing view. It's just a differing experience, right? So I've had the luxury of being involved with a few of these, as has Courtney, but a couple of them were kind of done to us, and a couple of them were helping do. And so it's really interesting to look back. And at Target, as much as it kind of extended over a multi-year period, it was for the most part a big bang. Like it was like one day, a bunch of project managers turned into Scrum Masters after some preparation, and the POs, I should say the BAs, I can't even talk the old language anymore. The BAs turned into POs, and magically we had a slew of Scrum teams across this entirely large product taxonomy, with the exception maybe of security and infrastructure with the first wave, and it was massive. And we had layoffs in the operational spaces that sat between technology and business every 3 months for 3 years until we got down to 35% less human beings in the organization. But for the most part, that was a big freaking bang. And it's hard to argue with the outcomes that they've accomplished over time, because we had 35% fewer people, double the productivity from an output perspective. From an outcomes perspective, you had increased stability, a much better ratio of contractor and employee development teams, so that you started to own your own code and have an engineering culture. And oh, by the way, the stock quadrupled. I mean, over a 4-year period. So it's tough to argue with that. I can tell you, as a human being that went through it, it was not easy to go through, and it was painful. And there were a lot of people that were kind of impacted by that along the way. But and then you've got the flip side, where right now I'm going through one with Department of Human Services, as I was talking about earlier. And my only goal for that initial pilot to start landing some of these concepts is full stack exposure from business leader down to business individual contributor, and technical leader down to technical individual contributor. There's no way in the world that DHS could magically do what Target did at scale. And so I see benefits and risks in both approaches. in order to do what Target did, it reinforces what Courtney said around leadership. They had a CIO that was willing to say, there are 800 priorities. Guess what? Now there are 80. There are 820 of these that have to be on the sideline for now. That takes a whole kind of leadership to land that message and actually have it stick and not get shot along the way. The CEO fully supported them as well. And so without that leadership, there's no way they could have made the progress that they made. And then on the, and so, yeah, I'll stop there for now. I could probably talk about 3 other places too, but I honestly think that there are pros and cons of both approaches. And that the big takeaway for me is that it's context specific. There's no textbook. If there was a textbook for how to do this, you wouldn't have this panel discussion. And so you've got to be aware of the environment within which you're working in order to figure out how best to drive it forward.
Right. Adam, you can play tiebreaker. How did you approach it in Air Force?
Yeah, definitely small and grew from our perspective. Mostly out of necessity, though, right? Like it's rare, I think, in at least in my experience, that you're handed a big bucket of cash to go do a kind of big bang transformation. We had to experiment a bit. We had to do something in the shadows and not tell people, and then just celebrate it when it was successful, and then let people take credit for it, and do some social engineering. So I think it was a little bit more kind of piecemeal and grow, and using kind of mitosis to our advantage to make people who, like, once they were able to kind of feel this different way of working, share it with others. But the leadership conversation really resonates with me here. I actually think, at least in our experience, the people on teams, like, this way of working is just like obviously better. It's more exciting and engaging and fun, and you get more out of it. We had people on our team who worked for major defense primes in the US who had been working on projects for years and years, and things never been to production before. They didn't know what it was like for things they worked on to actually be utilized by somebody. Now all of a sudden we're delivering multiple times a day, and that's exciting. Your work matters more. The place that we've struggled is that, like, initial first tier product leader in creating that, because what we have are project managers who have spent an entire career being able to be promoted and taught how to do things like track cost, schedule, and performance from a procurement perspective, or think about go get their PMP and think like. And I think leaders sometimes like overcomplicate their roles, and that, like, the idea that this complex system can fit in your head and on your chart and is like irrelevant, right? Like this project is not for you to understand with one person in yourself. It's your entire job is to resource and support your team so they can sense and respond to change. It's like it, right? I think we overcomplicate it, and I think it's really hard for people who have lived in a project mindset to all of a sudden switch and be like, oh, I'm not as important anymore. My job is just to make these people more effective, and that's it. And people may not even notice that. So, like, incentives get broken and all those things. I think that has been the hardest part for us, is navigating how to people's to go against their best interest and what's gotten them to where they are in their careers now. To fundamentally switch it is just painful for folks.
That's a great point about, and I've heard it being called the frozen middle. Like, so it's those kind of head of dev or head of design or whatever, and they're used to having their team, and they can tell the team what to do, and they allocate their team out, and that's their kind of power structure, and that's how they work. And now they're being told, as you were saying, it's more you're leading, you're showing by example, you're giving strategy. So how have you dealt? How did you personally deal with that kind of friction in the Air Force? We
just didn't use that model. So when we started Kessel Run, we had the unique ability to kind of start over, even from a business model perspective, which not everybody always has the ability to do. We were lucky in that sense. So we went directly into cross-functional teams, and even having like balanced leadership teams that like we're all working together, including the acquisition or procurement side of the house with the business and product and engineering. So we kind of forced it to happen. And we had the right people in the right places to do that. But we didn't solve the rest of the organization. So imagine, a 1,500 person organization. Kessel Run at that time is 40 of them, right? Working in a new way, being successful. The large majority of the organization, and from a fractal perspective, the DoD is the largest employer in the world. The large majority of them are still working in those functional silos, right? And it's really hard to break that. And actually, to be honest, we haven't had that much success even yet in taking what we've done at Kessel Run and other places in these small innovative projects and scale it across like the deep systems of the government. In a lot of ways, I think we're in this period where people are happy about these kind of projects happening and they like to think we're innovative, but it's like they're kind of treating these projects as over here on the kids table. Like, oh, you guys go do your cute stuff over there and be innovative, but all the, you know, the real work's going to happen over here at the adult table. So we've really had a hard time transitioning that success into large, deep system change.
Great. Courtney, have you managed that kind of deep system change?
Yeah, sorry. I have construction going on at my house, so I'm like feeling really bad. I feel like it's loud and I kind of hope it's not. But so I'm like trying to stay on mute anytime I'm not the person talking. So apologies.
It sounds great.
Okay, well, good. So yes, and I think that it's just this ongoing challenge and opportunity to continue to gain alignment. It's like, how do you really bring together the teams and try to lead by example in kind of how you're showing up as a leader and really driving those behaviors and being open to just learning along the way and continuing to evolve as you go through this. Sorry, now my dog is whining.
My baby was crying in the background earlier. Pete, do you have, like, so you've seen it from multiple different angles. Is this a common thread that, like, these kind of—
Absolutely. This is one of the things that I'm really, really passionate about right now, actually, and I'm trying to figure out some ways to almost productize how do you tackle that middle layer of the organization? Because what I've observed basically is that you get the senior leaders that buy into quote unquote transformation because it's, hey, I need faster to market and I need less cost, and that all sounds good. I want that. Go do that for us. And then we get to Adam's point earlier, we get the teams trained up and they're like, yes, I know this project stuff has been painful for years. You're my savior. I love doing this. Let's go do the work. Meanwhile, nobody has really invested to the degree that we invest in the individual contributors at the team level. I don't see that same investment at the middle layer when it comes to coaching people from managing to leading and from kind of directing to providing a vision and those types of things. And to me, it's part of the reason that I'm so passionate about those values that I shared earlier, because I truly believe that we can take each of those values and translate them to behaviors for each layer in the organization and for each function in the organization. So in order for us to be under a product mindset, what does that mean for our senior leaders? What does that mean for those middle managers and how they show up for folks? And what does it mean for the folks on the ground? And then also, what does it mean for the supporting functions around risk and finance and all these other shared services, so to speak, that are operationally focused? They have to show up and behave differently as well. And so trying to get it to a spot where the values aren't just the plaque on the wall. The values are things that drive behaviors, and then we believe that the behaviors are going to drive change. And so if you can internalize that and be able to equip that layer of the organization with, hey, success is different now, but holy crap, it's more fun. Like, you can actually develop people and see them grow in front of you, and be able to establish a destination and then get stuff out of the way. And so when I think about the systemic problems, like, that layer is the layer that should be changing these enterprise processes that are conflicting with the mindset that you're standing up on the individual product teams. And so for me, that's one of my favorite gigs, right? I mean, that's, if you can change one thing and then have a trickle down of 80 teams celebrating the fact that you just changed that, it's like, you get to be the hero, man. Like, you didn't have to direct anybody to do it. You didn't have to do anything else. You were just helping people. And so it's pretty basic kind of concept, but
it sounds lovely, and I'm going to play devil's advocate here because
yeah, go for it, man.
This process.
Yeah.
The pushback that I get is that we can't adopt that, and it's from those kind of people, because what they're saying is, if we do this, it's going to become chaos. And they're invested in maintaining the status quo because they've obviously done successfully in the status quo to get to where they are. So how do we tackle that problem where they say, look, if I suddenly let go of control and I give it all to the team, who's accountable? Who's going to make sure, like when in the old world, we've got races and it's like, this person's accountable, I'm going to solve this. In this new world, if you're like, I've had the feedback from somebody, okay, I'll let go of everything and just watch it all go to pot.
So my argument there has always been that, number one, you're living in a fantasy world if you think the current world actually has accountability built in, because the siloed model was created so that people can go like this on, well, it's not my fault, it's their fault. The design was bad, the developers didn't do it right, this didn't do it right, that didn't do it right. And to me, it's actually one of my favorite exercises, because I'm a recovering program manager and project manager and VA. So once you're there, you're always there to a degree. And so I've basically gone through and I've done racy exercises within an agile environment. And I think it's just hilarious, because you can say like, and I do it on purpose so that they can see how ridiculous it looks on paper, is that, yeah, a product person is accountable for prioritizing the backlog. So great, he gets the A or she gets the A. Who else is involved? Well, it's like ours are like all the way across the board. And so it's comical to me as when you look at a cross-functional team doing work together, that the whole concept of a single throat to choke is kind of a antiquated process. And so accountability, we can simplify it to say, yeah, product owns the business viability and technology owns the architecture and where we're headed, and UX controls the experience. But the old world of accountability for outcomes didn't really exist. The accountability was, did I complete the project plan via triple constraints? I'd much rather have accountability on the business impact of what I do. And that's a whole different cup of tea. So not sure if I answered it for you, but that's what how I think about it.
It was an interesting angle. And I like the business accountability, because that's one that I've seen pushback as well. So Courtney, from a technology perspective, are teams ready to take business accountability if they don't really have ownership of releasing and all these? Like, do we have to start with the technology first before we can start doing this cultural and team stuff?
So, I mean, I think that these transformations are company transformations. And I think often there's a spotlight put on technology, like, oh, tech, just go figure it out. We don't need to worry about the business outcomes, or the business teams don't really need to worry about the technology, work required to get better outcomes. And I truly believe where the lines are blurred is the most meaningful progress that I've ever seen, where it's not like you even have, like Pete's example, the siloed approach in technology is really also business and tech. And there should not be this, like boundary. It's arbitrary. Now, I do believe that it is critical to be clear about what outcomes you're trying to achieve, because then you can set guardrails, and then that creates empowerment, and then it doesn't turn into chaos. And it is important to be clear on kind of who's making decisions and how do you make decisions, because I've also been in scenarios where if you're not clear about those roles, then people just spin. So being specific and clear, I think, is high value. But having the technology work that you're doing lined up to a business outcome, I think also is energizing and exciting. And we can connect the work we're doing to business outcomes, which hopefully people get excited about. Because like, I'm doing work that's strategic and I can see it show up in whether it's your customer experiences or however you're thinking about it. But I have been in scenarios where I've started in tech because the organization was not ready to talk about a company transformation. So you can make progress. You can do automation of your deployment pipeline. You can improve your quality. You can do a bunch of things that are important and culturally invest, but it'll stall at some point if you don't have the business teams aligned on where you're going and the teams connected in a shared way around what outcomes they're trying to deliver.
That's a great example. And I'm just conscious of time. I could keep chatting for hours. So I'll just leave on a kind of one of the things that you mentioned, Pete, about the underinvestment. What's the kind of, I guess, if you were giving some advice now to people, what would you invest in your teams? How would you bring your teams along? What would be the thing that you would do? So Adam, sorry, just some uplifting final bits of advice.
I think maybe Pete, one of them said earlier that context is important. And I think having understanding that like the context of the business that you live within is incredibly important to decision making. You can't just pull frameworks off a shelf and just become Spotify overnight. Like those things don't work, and they're irrelevant in a lot of ways. You want to learn patterns, but apply them to the context that you have, and that's a good way to make your team feel empowered, make them feel like their context is valuable in the decisions that you're making. So find ways to extract that from your teams and apply it to this new way of working. So it doesn't feel like a new project or framework that you just learned in an offsite last week or at UXDX, and you're going to go apply it full scope. Figure out how to take what works and learn from your teams and have it be kind of a two-way conversation, I think is a good takeaway.
Great, thanks. And Pete, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I'd add a couple things to it. I know one of the things that we've had a couple patterns across the different efforts that I've been involved with that seem to be helpful. So one of them, obviously, is just coaching in general. So each of the transformations that I've had, that I've been involved with, have had a team of coaches working together. And I emphasize team simply because when I've seen centralized teams tackle change versus distributed, quote unquote, teams, so basically having folks that have the same skills, but they're all in different parts of the business and they're not co-located together to support each other. It's a very different kind of momentum. This work is hard and asking people to change is hard. And so we also need to support the change agents within the organization and make sure that there's enough of them that they have their own community to be supported. And then the other two things, Product Toolbox is one that I would highly recommend. I don't care what's in it, but some type of universality of language and kind of a curated set of tools for people when they're first learning how to do these things. So we created one that was called a playbook at Target. We had a toolbox at US Bank. We've got a toolkit at Kia. But they all kind of look at what are the types of activities that I do when I'm defining products, when I'm doing product discovery work, when I'm delivering a product, and when I'm assessing the impact of what I'm doing. And then how do I scale up a little bit without having to go to a kind of a paid framework or whatever. And those have been really helpful just in getting people's heads wrapped around what's being asked of them. Because, and I've learned this through failure in that when I first started, I still am an idealist, but I was a hyper idealist in that, hey, you used to have checklists. You don't have to have checklists anymore. You can just think for yourself and you should be excited by that. And like half of them said, yes. And half of them said, I think you're wrong. And they basically said, I need a checklist, darn it. Like, help me out on what the heck I'm supposed to do. I want to do it right. And so the playbook to me is a happy medium in that it's not governance. You're not required to use the tools, but they're curated for you. They are recommendations that if you're solving this type of problem, these are some things that you can leverage to try to tackle that problem. And if you know why you're using that, then you can go find something else as well.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of companies, they've shifted their project management office instead of being telling you what to do to being a supporting. So similar exercises.
PMO is a product basically where your customer is the team, and that's an exciting one. When you start seeing PMOs start leading transformations, then you know something is changing in the world. That's a good thing.
Right. And Courtney, we're well over time, but I'd love to hear your advice as well.
Yeah, I agree with what's been said. I think that shift in, call them centers of enablement or accelerators or whatever you want to call it, but like that shift in how we're getting the work done and the way that engagement happens. My other thing is, and I learned this myself, is what I had to unlearn. Because I've been in the industry a long time. It's like there are certain, I'll call it the playbook or toolbox that I've collected over the years. And I've had to take some of that and and unlearn it, because if I stay the course with that, I'm actually not demonstrating the new ways of working. Sorry. So that has been a huge kind of unlock for me. And figuring out like just how to continue to be, vulnerable and okay with, I don't have it all figured out. And how do I just set and lead with intent, and then be open to the ongoing learning that's required for this to stay, I guess, to keep the momentum and to keep my sanity.
Now, I love the example. Like, not enough people say I don't know, and I think it's a superpower in some places.